Good morning, everybody. If you don't know who I am, my name is Collin White. I got referred to as a tech guy earlier, so we'll go with that. Dan reached out to me a little bit earlier this week and said that he wasn't going to be able to make it, that he had some things that he had to take care of at the other church. And so he asked me to take care of the sermon this week, and I was like, that is totally fine. And so I was kind of brewing on it this week, trying to figure out what to talk about. And I know a few months, Jan said that I would be giving this specific sermon, and so I didn't want to make Jan a liar. And so this is the one I decided to go with. And so before we get started, if you guys wouldn't mind joining me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask humbly that you come before us and allow this message today to be from your heart and your will. Lord, I ask that the words that leave my mouth reach each and every ear here today. Please continue to work through us in your will and through your heart. It's that in your name we pray, amen. And so in an effort to talk this morning, I tried my best to do the best I could, but Dan's given some really good sermons here the last few weeks, and so having to follow that up is really, really tough. So to start off, I did want to talk about traveling to Jordan and some of the work that we did over there. I worked today to aim the message. I'll talk about some tourist things, but for the most part, I'm going to try to focus it on some of the biblical scenes that we got to see and some of the locations and stuff that happened there, and focus it with the verses so that not only am I talking about the place in the story, but I can point directly into the Bible of where we're talking about. So that was kind of the goal today, and as long as technology allows, we'll go as quickly as we can. So to kind of start off, we started out in Amman, Jordan. There it is. And so Amman is the capital of Jordan. That's where we spent most of our time. And throughout history, it's kind of been a revolving door of civilizations. From, I believe it started with like the locals, we moved on to the Romans and eventually the Byzantines. And so throughout most of our trip, you could see it in almost every area, the different kind of like architecture and the structure that we had. This specifically, we landed, we drove from the airport and went directly downtown. That freaked me out. But this was the Colosseum. So while the Romans were there, they built this giant, it was an amphitheater Colosseum type area where they gave performances, and it was enough to where the entire town at the time could fit in there. Several hundred people would be able to, or several thousand people would be able to fit in here, kind of the lower rings being where your royals would be, your landowners, those sort of things. And as you move up, kind of going down in class. And so there were spaces around it to where people would walk in with these pillars, different sorts of like, kind of like when you walk into like the Civic Center and you have like, they have all the things on the wall and they have all the decorations before you actually get inside. This is kind of what they had. And so like this is a view from the top down. And a lot of the structures in Jordan, they're pretty free to walk around. You'll see throughout some of the slides, you'll be like, why is he like there? Or like, how can he get there? Like in the US, you can't like walk up to the top of Mount Rushmore. Here they didn't really care. Like they're like, don't tear anything up, but pretty much just free reign. And so we were able to walk up and down the steps. The steps were secure. And it was really, really cool to see all of that. Another place there, actually down the road from the amphitheater, was the Citadel. This is where the original town of Amman sat. This was kind of their capital building, their capital area. They had several like different buildings there. You can see kind of like this is where the houses sat at. But then going on to the next slide, you can see that this looked out over the entire city of Jordan, or of Amman. Being able to, like this was, the royals of the area were able to look out over the entire town and kind of see all the people. And so this is where like the Capitol building sat at. Their, I don't want to call them churches, but where their worship spaces were. You can still see some of the pillars that are still standing today, which is absolutely incredible and a testament to kind of like how good their architecture and their building really was going forward. You can see like, yeah, several of the pillars are still standing. There probably was a floor here leading down into the basement, kind of where they buried some of their people were down there. And so we didn't go around down there because that's weird. But there was space to where you could go down and like walk around those sort of areas. Up there, they also had, kind of phasing into later past the Byzantine area, they had their mosque up there as well. So this was just one, you can see how things had changed, where the architecture was a lot of pillars, a lot of stone, a lot of hand design up top, and then as time moves on, they moved away from that, but focusing on like these domes. So like several of the mosques had this kind of dome structure to it, a little bit later design as well. A few early churches were up there. If my clicker will go. Yeah, a few early churches up there, just like from halls and stuff like that. And then the final place that we went was Jerash. And so this was, I don't want to say the capital Roman city, but this, for the Roman Empire, was their capital city in the area. And so this was another arena. They really liked arenas. And so if Forest City wants to take that on and add, like a civic center kind of thing, that's what the Romans like to do. And so I thought that they had a lot of those. They would have kind of anything you would see in Roman entertainment. They would have not jousting, but their different kind of events would happen in fields like this. And again, so the Pantheon where they worshipped in Rome, it's still standing. That's still there today. But this version here in Jerash, as a space to worship Zeus, it's still standing, and it's actually a more complete structure than the one in Rome. They talked about while we were over there that many of the different Roman structures that existed, because of the climate, they have less rain there, so less water damage and erosion. A lot of the Roman civilization structures are still standing today. And so this would have been their version of the Pantheon here in Jordan, and so it's still in better shape and a more complete section than the one in Rome, which is really, really cool. I know archaeologists have gone on to do a lot of work down there and learning more there than they did in actual Rome. And so we got to walk up and down the streets. Jerash is also placed as like a midway point for pretty much all trade at the time. And so there were 4 different roads that all met there. This is one of them. They had pillars lining the entire roads, and so all trade routes would go through there. So stuff going up, I don't want to say, back up to Rome from China and some of those more eastern countries would come through this location. And so you could see there's a great big intersection, and it was they called it the intersection of the world because almost all trade around the world came through that location. And kind of like I talked about, a lot of the structures are still standing. This was a water fountain at one time. Romans were really good with water, and I have way too many slides about water here, so get ready to talk about water a little bit. It rained Friday, so it's okay. But that was a fountain. This is another picture of that road going through. I think that one's coming from the north, so that one would have came down through from Europe to this location. And then kind of one of the other big stops we made was we did go look at a mosque while we were over there. This is the capital mosque. This is where the leaders of Jordan, Parliament, the king, and those individuals during their 5 prayers a day would come here and worship. And we got to go inside. Their whole thing is giving tours and trying to understand Islam as a religion. And so we got to go inside the main area and take a look at, Can we get one of those, Jan, eventually? Awesome. But they just had a lot of really cool structures in there, like the chandelier at the top of the room. That was pretty much the diameter of the entire room. It took up the entire space of that, of their sanctuary. And so we would also go over, they have this clock in here, which is incredibly hard to see from here, but it did have every single time that they prayed during the day. So in Islam, one thing they do practice is praying, 5 times a day? So at dawn, dusk, and then 3 other times during the middle of the day. And they'd had this clock going, here are all the times that you need to be here during the day to come pray. And so when Parliament's going, they take a break, they come here, do their prayer, and then they take off for the rest of the day. On the floor as well, they did have the carpeting. So obviously, they don't have cool pews like us. They kneel on the floor, and so the carpet was sectioned out to where that strip in the middle is where you stood, and then you'd have all that space in front of you to worship and however they practice. Walking around outside, they also had different rooms. They have a separate area for men's worship and women's worship, as well as for children. And those are just kind of, they had different rooms going on there for different types of ministries. But my favorite thing about it was right outside the front door, you looked across the street, and there was the church. And so I thought that was really cool. Right across from the Capitol Mosque in the capital of Jordan was a Christian church. And so that was, I thought that was really, really cool that they're right across the street from each other. Not intertwined. I don't think they do any relations with one another, but they do. I mean, it's all right there, right next to the Capitol building there in Jordan as well. And so, kind of like I talked about earlier, they have a lot of domes. The blue dome, I can't remember exactly what it was specific for, but that was pretty typical for mosques having a blue dome, I think to kind of separate it from the rest of the buildings. But the moon shape at the top is the symbol for Islam. Kind of like we have the cross for Christianity, the moon was on top of every single one of those buildings. And then one thing we got to visit too, specifically because I didn't ask, but it was because of me. We did get to go visit a farm over there. And so up kind of in northern Jordan is the Jordan River Valley. It's an extremely fertile piece of ground. They talk about it in the Bible several times. But we did get to go visit a farm. They talked about baking bread over there. They don't put it in the oven with like a tin or anything. They like take the bread, make it really flat, and then they slap it to the top of the furnace there. This is soap. It took me a minute to remember what that was when I was going through pictures. But that was soap. They make a lot of soap over there, specifically from camel or goat's milk, and they kind of rotate between those. We went on to go down the river to one of their fields. I'm pretty sure that was a case ripper is what worked that field, but I'm not entirely sure. It certainly wasn't a John Deere. A John Deere would have done better. But we did get to go down and see one of their fields. I believe this one they were trying to grow green beans in, which was really ironic because we grow green beans in this area, and then to travel halfway across the world, and they're attempting to do the same thing. I did get a picture of the seeds, I think, yeah. And they look a lot different than ours too. Usually, like green bean seeds, a little bit longer, a little bit bigger, and these ones were extremely small, and they typically just scattered them in the area. But they also have extremely rocky soil, and so it's difficult to pack and like get a good seed bed as well. Other popular things that they grew there, like lemons, like you can see here. They also grow loofahs, like you would use in the shower, but not the plastic ones. Like they grew real loofahs to ship around the world, which I thought was really interesting. Apparently nobody else did that, but that's something they grow and take pride of over there as well. And then finally, this was an olive grove that they had. So this used to be, the guy talked about, this used to expand the entire valley. Kind of going up and down the hills there is very popular. And then when the Romans came in, that was something that was burned. And so those trees are, when did the Romans, but those trees were several thousand years old, which I thought was really, really cool, is that they had this grove that had been maintained for that long. And so that was like the remainder of what they had there. Kind of the next area we went to was Wadi Rum. So if you ever watch like The Martian, or like space movies where they're going out into the desert, several of those are filmed here. So we went out there one day. They had this resort that we were able to go to. You can see that kind of what our resort rooms looked like, were these tent-like structures. But it was really cool because you have like this wide open sand, and then you have these like several different rock structures. So like the natural arch there as well. There are two places in the entire world where arches naturally form. One is in Moab, Utah, here in the United States, and then the other place is in Wadi Rum, Jordan. And so I have been to both natural arch locations in my lifetime, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, we went out there, we rode around in these trucks, these Toyota Helixes, and so they had like benches in the back and a little tarp, and then we just drove through the desert and going to the different arch locations and some of the rock formations that they had. These specifically are the 3 boats. They're supposed to look like big, long ships. And I think this structure specifically was used as an influence in the Aladdin movies when they were designing some of like the background pieces, kind of like where they were traveling. This was one of the things they based some of that background off of. Just another picture of some of the rock formations out there. But the final location that we went during our day was this rock specifically. people, you'd be able to climb all the way to the top of it and then watch the sunset come down across the desert. The next spot we went was the Indiana Jones gift shop. Didn't know I needed to go to that. But no, the actual next location we went was Petra, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Also where Indiana Jones 3 was filmed, which honestly was my favorite part. I'm a huge fan of those movies. And so it was really cool to go there and see that area. That is specifically a temple and a sanctuary, but all of Petra is actually, it was a functioning town. So kind of like we talked about, like the Romans were there, the Byzantines came through, there were locals before that. And so they had areas like these would have been where people lived at. They had carved houses and rooms out of the side of the mountain to where they would live at. They had an amphitheater and a coliseum there as well for entertainment, somewhere to go, like go socialize. But then the entire walk down was kind of these kind of tunnel looking. So you would walk down through the rock, all of that carved out throughout time. Some of it naturally, and then some of it from rivers that went through the area where water flowed. So that was like, that's where you walk down. But then you can see, going to the next slide, that where the rivers flowed, they had carved these little like waterways down the side. So if it rained at the top of Petra, they would have water down at the bottom, and it wouldn't tear up any of the roadways. They wouldn't have that water erosion. It would actually go down these drains down the side of the walkway. And so they would be able to get water throughout the entire town. And where some of their houses sat at, they would be able to, like, water's flowing down the drain. It's like, go, pick up your water for the day, and come back. You wouldn't have to walk several miles to get there. And then the last location that we went that was kind of more touristy was the Dead Sea. I don't have a ton of pictures of it, but I can tell you about it. Yeah, I floated. The water is extremely dense, full of salt. Don't have any cuts if you go in there. I don't suggest it. It burns. But yeah, it's just, ironically, a lot of the space around the Dead Sea is like a resort type area. So we were able to go to that resort. We hung out there for a little bit, got to float in the Dead Sea. They have the mud everywhere to cover your cuts and burns, like in just like little pots. But the most important part of the trip, the part that everybody would care about, is the food. And so I did. One of my friends, Ali, I met him at school. He was originally from Lebanon. And so before I went on this trip, he was the one who convinced me. He's like, this is the breakaway that you need to take while you're in college. I was like, okay. And so he left me this list of food that I needed to try while I was over there. And I know, yeah, all the yellow things means I tried it. So I was able to screenshot that and send it back to him and said I did it. And then he sent me like 10 more. And so I wasn't able to add those on the list. But he sent me this entire list of food to try. Most of it is either chicken or lamb. Rice is extremely popular. That is a mint lemonade on the end, which was great. Yeah, most of the meals contain like a version of lamb, a version of chicken with rice, several vegetables grown in the area, and even like a different form of salsa, which was really, really cool. Not traditionally how we would have it, like a Spanish-style salsa, but it was always like, it was more chunky, but contained more local spices as well. So it looked like salsa, but it was, and they had it with every single meal. It was like we would like ketchup or something. But they had it with almost every meal. And then bread was also super popular, as well as pickled vegetables as well. So that's what, like, those pink things you can see on the side, those are actually like pickled beets that they had served with a lot of meals, which was super, super popular. So I said I would make this as biblically based as I could, and so the verse I picked out today comes from Mark chapter 4, verses 26 through 29. And he said, "The kingdom of God is as if man should scatter seed on the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows. He knows not how. The earth produces by itself first the blade, then the ear, and then the full grain in the ear. But it is when the grain is ripe, at once he puts it in the sickle, because the harvest has come." So this is the theme verse for the organization that we went with. So this trip, when I was at Illinois College in Jacksonville, at the end of the year, students have this option to go on a breakaway trip to different locations. This year we happened to one of the options was to go to Amman, Jordan. We had alumni over there who run ran the center, the Marquez al Wessel, as a organization. Their entire goal was helping refugees that had come to Jordan. Jordan has one of the highest per capita rates of refugees in the entire world, with over 710,000 in the country. Most of those refugees are from the different wars in the region. So obviously like Yemen, Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, just to name a few. And so this organization that they started over there, their entire goal is to provide resources for these individuals who are struggling because they're having to move like hundreds of thousands of miles to get to this location for safe harbor. And so this is their center, but this is their blueprint of what they practice and how they do it. And so it starts out going through, starting in verse 26, talking about the seed. Yes, talking about the seed. The seed is the refugees in Jordan. So their goal is to reach out to each individual person, being able to meet these people and to be there for them. The sow part of it, going into verse 27, is training, home visits, discipleship, training. And so these refugees are able to go to the center to get the resources that they need, whatever it may be, clothes, to figure out where food is at, sometimes medicine. But then in exchange, they would also want people to come visit their home. And so they have these people, they have staff at the center trained, mostly other refugees who have gone through this program, go and visit them at their homes and talk about their experiences and what they had to go through, but also talk about, you know, there are people in the Bible who went through the same thing. Many of them are talking about having to travel hundreds of thousands of miles to get here. Well, so did Moses. Moses had to travel through the desert with his entire family to get to the Promised Land, Ammon being the Promised Land, kind of in connection with that. And so that's what they do, is they go to these homes. We went on these home visits to talk to them about the gospel, hear their story, many of them super heartbreaking, but they grow into their own, which is verse 28, into their own studies, their own discipleships. As they continue their path to find God and to find Jesus, they are able to grow and have their own desire to study. And then finally, the harvest is forming local churches and home churches. So wherever two people meet, God is present, and that's what they're trying to go for. In a country that's primarily practicing Islam, trying to insert Christianity into homes and local areas. So encouraging refugees like, hey, we're all neighbors, let's get together on Wednesday and have a Bible study kind of thing. Encouraging discipleship within their own homes and communities without having to go through going through the center, which is cool. So we spent a lot of time there going on these home visits, hearing people's stories. There was a day where people could come and get clothing and stuff, kind of like Emmanuel's Warehouse in our area, but was more specifically for like clothes and different medicines. And these were the people who worked there. That's an incredibly difficult picture for you to see. I don't know why I put that in there. But there were several different people who had gone through the program, were refugees, spoke Arabic and English, and were able to go on these visits and meet with these people who had also gone through the program, making it more interactive, allowing people to understand, you know, this is truly what I went through the same thing. I found Jesus, and this is what has come in my life, and the great things that he's brought along as well. So going on to actual locations that we went, the first one comes from 1 Kings 17, 3 and 4. This is the story of Elijah. And so Elijah, one of my favorite characters in the entire Bible, a dude living out in the wilderness. He was wearing bear skin, you know, fighting people with his bare hands kind of thing. But in 1 Kings 17, 3 and 4, and as well as 1 Kings 19, 4, we see Elijah living in the wilderness. He was born kind of in the wilderness, and when he was going into his depression, fighting against Sodom and Gomorrah, going to hide, he went back to the wilderness. And so the location that we were at is where they believe that he went during that time, where he was born and then where he stayed. And so this was his church. A lot of the prophets in the area who had significant impact, later Christians, or even some very early Christians, built these temples and churches where they had been at. And so this one happened to have fallen apart. I assume this is like an older one, since Elijah's an Old Testament story. But But this is where they believe he was at. So they built a church there. You can see that they had like a chapel area similar to what we have here. And it's shaped like a cross. The bottom is the top of the cross, and then the sides, and it goes down. But then they also have, going back to water, they had these drainways as well, because people come to the church seeking resources, and in that time they would be making wine, and so this is how they would catch water. They had these drains that would rain at the top and flow down into these wells, where they kept water and were able to use that water to go on and make wine. This is where the sanctuary was at, and so the floor of the sanctuary, it wasn't carpet, it wasn't wood, it wasn't stone, they were all mosaics. And so that's something that was super popular among a lot of the churches, and we'll go on and see. They had mosaics all over the floor. And so you could walk around and like look at the different pictures, and all they had was this one walkway going down the middle to where you could see where the mosaics were at, looking across the floor that had lasted thousands of years. But at the end of the walkway was this tree. And so talking about Elijah in his individual faith with God, faith in God, that's all he had. That's all he had going through this difficult time was, they said, an individual prayer. And so at the end of the walkway was this tree, and every single person who visited you get like this bow, and you would tie it onto the branches of the tree as your one individual faith, your one prayer to God, just like Elijah did. And so everybody got a bow, you tie your prayer up, you say a prayer, and then you tie it up there in hopes as a sign to God. Like most churches, they also had their where their tombs were at, that you could like walk down and see a little bit into. Again, they're like, don't walk around tombs, but here's where they are. And so we got to see some of those. But then we also have this. This is a river valley where they believe that he stayed. This is probably where he was born, and then probably where he would go and retreat to, was this river valley right here. So that from where the church sat, you could overlook the valley and go in and see where that was at. The next space we went to is this town called Irbid. This building specifically is on Jordanian currency, the Jordanian currency. And so you could see, I just had this bill and I held it up and it's like, wow, that's the same thing. So you could go and take a look at that. But this town, several different verses take place here, several different stories. So the first one is King's Road. They believe that Jesus walked down this road along this town. Again, this is like several different centuries of groups coming in, Romans, Byzantines, locals, and so you can see like the shops and stuff where it's at, monasteries, those sort of things. But you could walk around. They had the different types of like mosaics up from the different eras. They did have tiling as well. So the original drain tile, I would hate to rip these out with a ripper because that would be awful. They were made of clay, but they did have those for their farms and stuff to where it would, there it is. The different kinds of drain tile that they would have for their fields, mostly intact, made of clay, and they would put that under their fields to drain extra water out and be able to capture it as well. But you were able to look out over the town, several different shops. In this picture specifically, looking out from the main area, so in the distance on the far left, it'd be my left and your left, that is Israel from that direction. So we are right along the border here. We were within 2 miles of Israel. And then on the far right, the little bit lighter color, that is Lebanon. And so from that spot, we were almost right there on the corner of those three countries. This was before things have gotten really bad over there in the last few years. So we were not watching anything like that going on. But yeah, we were able to walk around the town. Again, they had some of their tombs for people. But this next one, this is the start of King's Road. And so they believe that Jesus walked up and down this path a few different times throughout the Bible, kind of on his journey and his ministry. This was one to where if you were walking down King's Road and you were a high official, if you were an actual king walking down the road and you wanted to sneak into town, you didn't want people to catch you, you would go down this tunnel and it would take you to the place you were going to stay typically. Like many places, they had their amphitheaters as well. But then this is the actual road that it went on. So this went all the way down along the Jordan River, probably down to Jeresh, I would think at some point. I didn't walk it. That's too far for me. We had cars. And so these were just different pictures of the roads, different groves along the side. different different things going on along the side of the road, rest stops. But it did come down to this spot right here. And so this picture individually comes from Matthew 8:28 through 32. This is a story of when Jesus went to a town believed to be Irbid, is the town that they're talking about. But he went to a town, and there was a man possessed by demons. And so he cast out the demons, put them in the pig, and ran them into the Sea of Galilee. They believed that he lived in the side of the caves, and this is where the caves were at, where that man lived at. And so you can see in the next picture to where that's where the caves were at, and that's the Sea of Galilee. And so usually when you hear the story of Jesus casting those demons out and the pigs running into the ocean, you think like, oh, it's probably like from here to down there. No, it's like a 2-mile run is how far these pigs went, just kind of showing Jesus' power and his ability. It wasn't a fluke. You don't mistakenly run 2 miles as a pig as a fluke. No, it was Jesus' power to cast these demons out. And so the story also goes on to talk about the man he went on to preach, telling the good news, and they believe that town he went to was Irbid. That is where the first place he went after Jesus had saved him. And then I believe his disciples also stay in these caves afterwards. Instead of staying in town, they would stay out in these caves to kind of avoid those sort of things. But on the Sea of Galilee, this is also, you're probably super familiar with, just the stories from there where he met Simon and Peter in Matthew 4:18 and 19. But this picture specifically, I thought was super interesting, and there's not a Bible verse to go along with it, but I think its significance it's not talked about enough. So this is the tomb of what they believe were the first Christians. And so this tomb is dated around 33 to 70 AD, the first believers. So there probably would have been a church of some sort here. It's along King's Road, and it's not marked. That was the other thing is like, when you walk around a museum or you're walking around different locations, they have like the placard and they talk about like, oh, this is what this is. There's nothing here. There's like a bullet on the list at the tourist thing that is like Irbid, first Christian tomb, and then like that's it. That's what this was. And so they believe that this church where they went is probably where Christians would practice Christianity in secret. They would hold their worship services or Bible studies, or if they were trying to hide from people, they would go to this place. And so this is the tomb where they went down. They had like the brickwork in there, and then as you go farther down into it, where the tomb actually sat. And so you can walk down and kind of just see, these were the first Christians that died for Christianity, and this is where they're buried at, most likely, which is super, super cool. The next place we went was on the Jarbok River. So this was after we visited Jaresh. We went down the road. Our host, he was like, hey, we're gonna get food. We're gonna go have lunch at like this park area. And we're like, oh, that's really cool. Eating next to the river. That's cool. And so we went there, and then he started talking about what this area was. And so this falls into more of local legend, but they do have evidence that it occurred there. And so in Genesis 32, 24 through 28, we hear the story of when Jacob was wrestling with the angel or wrestling with God, and they're going, and then he knocks his hip socket out, and then he changes his name from Jacob to Israel. And this is where they believed it was in this location. Granted, Genesis, a very old book, but they know it's along the Jarbok River, and according to local legend, that's where they believed it was along this riverside, where Jacob sat and he wrestled the angel for, I think it was almost a day, in having this confrontation. And so that was really, really cool. It was just a random spot along the river. It's something that's hearsay. Everybody talks about it, but there's no placard or anything that says that, but this is what locals through hundreds, thousands of years have talked about. This is where this event occurred at. And so going on to this location, we did go on to Mount Nebo, which, if you're familiar with that, is where Moses died, and where he looked out over the Promised Land, and then that was the end of his journey. And so specifically in this spot, they had this placard. Granted, it was a really windy or really dusty day, so you couldn't see stuff. Super unfortunate. But God talked about being able to look over the Promised Land. That was the last thing that Moses did. And so from this location, you could see spots like you could see Bethlehem, Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, Jericho, the Dead Sea, all of these things that God had promised to his people from the spot. And so this was also a statue there where they believe that he died at. It was his the rod of I'm going to butcher this name, the rod of Episcopals, something like that. But this is the medical symbol. So in Numbers 21:9, Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole so if any serpent bit somebody, it'd be able to heal them. And so this is used as a medical symbol. If you're familiar, you probably see it in hospitals or on different things like that. This is what he had, and then they put a giant statue of this here. But kind of like Elijah, they also had a church there. This is the Church of Moses. This one has been more upkept throughout time, but inside they had several different mosaics in there. They had, spots where tombs were at. You could go look at those. And they did have, so one cool thing about that location, because it's so close to Amman, is they do have active worship practices there. Not exactly like we meet, but they do have services that go on there as well. And so they had several different mosaics in there, some of them as old as the church itself, being able to keep those together. But ironically, a lot of them, like this one, depicting the serpent, the fruit of good and the fruit of evil, and then going on to kind of like, this one was kind of like the story of Noah, talking about the different animals, but then also like the very early times of Abraham and some of their travels as well. So just kind of different mosaics talking about those very early times that they had built in honor of Moses. And so the last location that we went during the entire trip was the Jordan River. So this is a picture of where the river used to flow. So coming from Matthew 3:13, Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to John the Baptizer to be baptized by him. This is where they believe that he was baptized at. This is where John the Baptist's ministry took place. And as time, the rivers kind of moved and swayed, but they believe that the river ran through here, and then this is where he practiced, where John baptized Jesus at. And so we walked down this long walkway underneath the cover of this thing, and it took us to this church. And so this is the Church of Jesus Christ that they have. So out of all the prophets, out of all the characters in the Bible, this one is Jesus' church. And so they don't practice any services there, but you're allowed to go to look at it. And it is right across from the Jordan River. So it overlooks the river here. And so on that, you can see on that side is the Israel side. And so it's very built up. They have steps and walls, and it's really fancy and really nice. And then on our side, it's like a dirt path, and they have like a wooden platform and then steps that go in the river with that like little cover on it. But they do believe that Jesus was baptized on the Jordan side of the river, not the Israel side. But we did go on, and yeah, they do have active baptisms there. Large groups on the Israel side would come down there. People on the Jordan side, we would walk down. But while we were there, I did decide I was baptized in the Jordan River. That is our host, Brad. He was the one who baptized me while we were there. That year had been a long journey, a long spiritual journey for me. And so while we had finished the trip, I decided, I was like, you know what? Nothing against my parents, but I was like, this one was my choice. And so I decided to get baptized in the river. Some of my friends that were there decided they also wanted baptized and asked me to be part of it, which was super cool. And so we got to baptize my friend Abby, my friend Sarah, Paige. And then one thing I didn't mention is during this trip we had, like the family, they had 2 little kids, and then their upstairs neighbor in their apartment building, her name was Hala. And so she, her family was like Christian, but they didn't really practice all that much. And so she was kind of following our host and her spiritual journey. And so while we were there, she traveled with us to almost every single one of these sites, which I was like, shouldn't you be in school? But she got to travel with us most of the time. And so she came with us for this part. And while we were there, watching all of her friends get baptized and seeing us, she decided to join us. And so this was her first baptism. She had never been baptized before, and she made that decision today to be baptized. And so that was super exciting for us. And to end it, that's pretty much all I have for this. So if you guys have any questions, we're running out of time here, so I don't want to hold you guys up. But if you wouldn't mind joining me in prayer real quick. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to once again rejoice in your word and your story. Lord, we ask that you continue to work in our lives and continue to work through us, do your will through us, and allow us to continue to spread your good word and the message that you have.